Okay, welcome everybody to the FileMaker Pro User Group Dallas chapter, February 4th, 2022 user group meeting. We're glad to have all of you. I'm Taylor Sharpe, and myself and Greg Price are the chapter co-coordinators, and we're glad to have everybody here to talk all things FileMaker and see what all's happening. As a backdrop, we're having a snow and ice day here in Dallas, and most everything's shut down. So we're not in the harmonic data offices that we normally meet in because everybody is at home. So those of us who are able to join us virtually, we're glad to see everybody virtually here. So we will get things going. To start off with, I guess we'll let the announcement out now. Freitag sent his message out yesterday to let us know Engage 2022 is not going to happen in Nashville. So maybe they'll do something virtual, but they have canceled Developers Conference for this year. So third year in a row. So I was a little disappointed about that, but anyway, it's the call that they make. I'm sure they were looking at probably had to have deposits in and trying to figure out what was going to happen this summer. And of course, nobody knows for sure, but I still think that it would have been, they would have had a great attendance. But anyway, we'll see what happens. So if you wasted your time like me to put speaker presentations in, you spun your wheels for nothing. Save them for 2023. Brad's laughing at me.
Yeah,
he knows what I'm
I know how much
about.
work that is, man. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. So anyway, but for those of you who haven't ever been, the annual developers conference, which is now called Engage, actually is a very fun and interesting conference to go and it's a combination of networking. You do some learning, but really more than anything else, it's from a creative perspective. You get to see how other people are using FileMakers in ways you never thought about. And so it's, I find it a way to get ideas. It's not that I usually learn things, it's that okay, I know how to use this function, but I go and I learn to see how people were using this function in a way I had never thought of before. And bing, the light bulb goes on. And
see that,
So you have a lot of those things. So
yep. All right, cool. Any plans for the weekend?
Yep. So it's a good conference stuff. So, but anyway, we'll be doing it virtually if they do anything at all. So we'll things will be as they are. But so turning around to our subjects and announcements here, we're going to do our conference today. Our conference our user group meeting is going to be about Let's and While. So let's see if I can get my screen sharing working here.
Hey, Taylor, could I go ahead and make my little announcement and jump out?
Yes, this is a time to do announcements and things. So Brad, go first, and anybody who wants to follow him, and then we'll rock it.
Cool. So my last gig was working with Portage Bay, who's up in Washington State, and of course they've got remote workers like everybody else. And we have somebody that's going to be taking my place out of Portage Bay to come to these meetings, and that is Jacob Carr. Hey, Jacob, wave there. There he is.
Hey, Jacob. Welcome.
And I'll let
nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, I'll let you give him. I'll let you give them the details about yourself. But Jacob's been a blast to work with. He's what, about 3 years into FileMaker? 3 or 4 years in now?
Yeah, about 3 years in.
Yeah. So he's on the way up, and he's got a lot to learn from you guys, and just like I learned from you guys. So I'm eager to see what kind of Frankenstein you make out of him after you blow his mind with all the stuff that you guys do on a daily basis. So anyway, I'm really excited, and I'll be talking to Jacob on and off as he's able to get into these meetings and see what the latest skinny is. But anyway, I have enjoyed it. I'm now in the economic development world, and yes, I'm using FileMaker to organize myself. So I'm not out of the business, but I'm not doing it for a living anymore. So anyway, I will see you guys around. I'm sure you'll hear from me again at some point.
Okay.
Thanks, Brad.
Good seeing you.
All right, see you.
Good to have you, Jacob. I still, Brad was always a creative part of our user group. I will tell you probably the one thing I remember when I was first getting involved with a user group, I'd known of Brad, but I'd never heard a presentation. And he likes to think a little bit outside of the box a lot more than me. I'm very left-brained. He's very right-brained. And I remember him coming to one of the user groups to give a presentation that I couldn't believe this. I was like, why would you do this? But he did a whole presentation on, can I make a database that entirely exists in one field? And he proved that you can do that. Now, why you never want to do that, I don't know. But granted, down the road, this was long before JSON and things like that. I was thinking along those lines of things. So actually, it did have some purpose down the road. But I just thought Brad was always a hoot because he certainly thought outside of the box in ways that I certainly did
If
not.
anyone could do that, it was Brad.
Certainly. How you doing, Heather? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. Sorry I'm late.
Yes. Well, I'm sure you're probably out shoveling the snow, right?
Not at all. I'm staying in what we are calling my hybrid office.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Which is the cove end of my bedroom.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Heather is with Harmonic Data, one of the platinum partners, and we normally meet at her offices. We do the virtual thing too, but we normally meet at her offices, which we appreciate, but obviously they're closed today. Robert phoned like an hour ago, all in panic. Oh, you know, we're not going to be there. I'm like, yeah, we assumed.
Yes, we have a Slack channel called Out of Office, and at about 9 o'clock, it started filling up with messages. Everyone's saying, I was just putting mine in. I was typing mine, and I was about to hit send when Steve showed up saying, I just came back from my morning walk, and it's not looking good out there. So I will be staying home this morning, and I suggest you all take care in making your decision. Because the roads in my neighborhood are not looking good.
Yeah, it's a work from home day, but that also makes for a good user group virtual meeting day. So anyway.
That's right.
So any other announcements from the user group community before we kick off on our presentation? Okay, without any further announcements, we will get rocking and rolling on our presentation. Let me get my screen share going up. Some of the older generation can get a little chuckle out of this if they see it. So anyway, you younger people just be humored. Anyway, that's from Rodgers and Hammerstein's The Sound of Music musical. Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. So let's will be our first subject, the functions let's and while. So we're going to take a little look at those today and see what we can figure out. So come on, there we go. So what is let? So if you go to the FileMaker help and you ask what a let is, you'll get this first line right here is what they give you. And they say that is a let. And I've got a couple of examples, but before we delve into them, here's two examples. One is a one-line example, and one is the second line, the third line down here is a way where lets and all these calculations in FileMaker are basically white space doesn't mean anything. So you do not need to do white space tabs and returns and stuff, but a lot of us do them to pretty them up. So that's why the bottom way it's being done is how I will be showing you throughout here, simply because I can read it better. I know some of you real smart guys don't need that, but the formatting matters to me. That's why I have to use JSON format elements all the time. So, okay. So the let function came out in FileMaker Pro 7. How many of you out there were using FileMaker 7? It was quite a while ago. It was actually when FileMaker, probably the biggest change ever came to FileMaker happened from 6 to 7, truly became a regular relational database then. But along with that came the let function. And if you go to the official FileMaker help thing and ask what is the let function, it says the let function allows you to assign the results of expressions to variables and return a result that can use those variables. Use let to make complex formulas easier to read by reducing the need for calling functions within functions. Let can also make formulas more efficient by storing the result of functions and variables for reuse within the formula, reducing the number of redundant function calls. So that's quite a mouthful. And I will tell you, it probably wasn't until about FileMaker 9 that I really started using lets, because I was like, why would you use let? You just keep making another variable, and that's how you group things. So I had these scripts that had a whole bunch of set variables that I could have just made into one, but I didn't get it at the time. And, and you didn't get it, you don't. So anyway, that's the official definition, but let's talk about why to use lets. The first example we have up here is, this is just a kind of a made up formula here. So 3 times some table occurrence in a field plus 3. So it's just a formula. And I've redone it as a let down here, and you say let, and then we're going to declare our variables. A equals 3 times the field, and then the B variable is A plus 3, and the result is a B here. So I guess, originally when I looked at things and why I had a hard time being sold on trying to start using lets, is I looked at that first line and I was like, well, that's shorter. Why would I want to do something that looks more complicated, especially when you don't understand how lets work? The second part looks more complicated. So it was a tough sell on me to originally jump onto why I would want to do a let. So, but some of the disadvantages of lets are, they obviously are longer and they can involve more calculations. I will say, if you depending on how you do things, a let can call more functions and actually be slower than just the direct one line on the first example. So if you're really into optimizing things, there's some reasons you might want to avoid certain types of lets, but in general, I've been hard pressed to ever find a time that the performance was ever worth the difference in being able to read and understand what's there. And the benefits being that, easier to read. That's one of the big things. If you understand how it works, it's easier to read. The next benefit that is really a big one to me is easier to debug. And we will show examples of how to debug, but basically every one of those variables that you're setting, you can debug by changing the result to see what the interim result is for that variable. And it makes it a whole lot easier to debug than a single line, long calculation. And then, of course, as mentioned in the definition before, you can call once, use multiple times for fields and things like get current date. Certain types of things in FileMaker take longer to perform. Calls to fields take a lot more time to call than a call to a variable. And calls to the operating system, like get current date, take more time than variables. So by doing as much as you can in variables instead of these calls to fields or the operating system, will make things go faster. And particularly if you only have to call them once, like if you're going to do a bunch of things with like get current date or a bunch of things with a particular field, you can call it once and use it over and over as a particular variable. So that actually makes things go faster. So those are some benefits and disadvantages of using let. So just to kind of blow your mind, I know Mike Strange is probably about to shoot me over here, but yes, you can even use a let within a let. So so just to give you an example of, this is a overall is the big let, and then within it, the B is a let within the let that then returns a result to that outer let. So you can nest lets. So it can make things, if you don't format them nicely, that can get very confusing. But yes, lets can be nested, and that can be very useful sometimes too. And lets can be made dynamic in that you can basically use text string manipulation to spell out a let. And this is a let within a let, but the let within the let is using text string to spell out the let function, and then use evaluate to evaluate what that text string is to perform a calculation. So I don't want to get a whole lot into the evaluate, but evaluate is where you can tell FileMaker to use text strings to pull things together and make a formula, and then evaluate reads that formula and evaluates it. And of course, if you don't get it perfectly right, it bails out and gives you the question mark. But evaluate can be wonderful because it can be dynamic, because what you're putting in that dynamic let there can vary depending on what's in different fields or variables. And we'll look at some further examples of that. But this is an example of a let within a let, but also let being used to evaluate. And we'll use some examples of how that can be done too. Okay, and this is yet another example of a let within a let, but one of the things that's interesting, lets can use variables. We're using the variables A, B, and C, and when they're used in the set part of a let, those variables go away right away. Just kind of like a dollar variable in a script goes away as soon as the script ends. Well, as soon as this let ends, all of these in the first part between the first brackets here, all of those immediately are dumped out of cache for you. However, you can use variables like dollar attachment, and I could have had $B here. I could have declared a variable, and if you put the $ in front of it, it retains that value throughout the rest of the script, and that can be very useful if something within a let you want to use further down in the script. Put a $sign in front of the variable, and it will continue to be used. In the same way, if you put $$ in front of it, it becomes a global variable, and it is retained after the script even ends and can be used later on. So using variables can be very interesting. But in this example here, what I'm showing is I'm showing a dynamically assigned variable. So we have a variable that's $attachment, and I'm using a text string to define $attachment. But $attachment is not always just $attachment. I'm adding something to the end of it. I'm adding a to the end of it, which is variable a, which is the integer of random times 10. So I'm basically getting a number between 0 and 9, and I'm adding it to $attachment. So it might be $attachment 1, or it might be $attachment 9 or something, and setting it equal to some value out here. And so the neat thing about lets is you can use that to dynamically assign variables. And this can be very useful if you have, if you're dealing with things that are like $attachment 1, $attachment 2, $attachment 3, basically what you think of as being non-normalized in fields, but you have that situation in variables. You can use this to dynamically manage those variables and assign them based on other things that come to them. So it can be a little tricky in that when you do a text string to do the let, you have to make sure that you worry about double quotes. For example, you'll notice when you do a let, you declare your variable. So our first one is declaring the variable, and then you declare the result. If you put quote, quote, that's not going to work. You have to tell it to ignore the quote. So you have to do backslash is the escape character. And so to get quote, quote within the text string, you have to put a backslash between each double quote. Otherwise, it acts like the quote that closes the text string. So be aware of if you're using quotes within your text string, you have to use the escape character to keep them from closing your text string. So anyway, that caught me a bunch in the beginning when I was first using that. So I use, and the reason why I chose this attachment is I have another solution that I do a lot of SendGrid emails for clients that send out a bunch of emails, and they might have various numbers of attachments. And so basically it's so that we can have a dynamic number of attachments passed as variables, and then we can clear them out afterwards. So anyway, that's why I was using the dollar attachment stuff. Okay, so before I get on to the next section of whiles, let's see if there are questions about the let function and how it works. Any question? Well, first of all, is there anybody out there that is not using the let yet? Because I imagine a lot of you have been using it to some degree or another. Is there anybody that this is new to, completely new? Okay, so I'm assuming most all of you are using the let function one way or another, including you, Mike Strange, right? Yeah, Mike's being quiet. It's not his favorite function. But the most people use lets like we have here in this first example here. But what I did want to show you was the using lets within lets is something that a lot of people don't use or are unfamiliar with, and then using lets for dynamic variables is something that's very useful, and that's something that a lot of people are not aware of that I run into that are just getting started with lets. So just
I don't have any questions, but I would add that I'm glad you showed the dynamic lets and the text use of that, because that's actually something I do quite a bit of, where actually I think it was the one just before this one that you showed. No, maybe not that one. Where you were showing how you can use text and evaluate the text, because I do a lot of that where I have text. Yeah, this one here. So I have formulas that I evaluate because I have rules for validations, right? So a lot of rules, say for accounts payable, like a lot of different rules that expenses have to follow. So like you can't have dates that are in the future. You can't pay an expense if the person that the expense is being paid to has a red flag on their record, right? And there's like 30 different rules, and the people in accounts payable who are processing these, they don't know all the rules that for every person, for everything. Is this person over budget, right? Well, they're not going to go look at every person's budget, but the system is, right? So for every expense and for every line item on the expense, the FileMaker system is going to go check all the rules for them. So it uses something very much like this, and it does an evaluate. And for every line, it goes out and uses a let and checks the rules. And those rules are stored as text values in validation rule records. And those get stored, during the process, they're stored as variables, as global variables. So they're just text in the variables. And the system goes through and does an evaluate, just like this in the let statement, and does an evaluate of them.
So for example, you would be plugging in a person's privilege set. And so the evaluate needs to evaluate that person's privilege set, which needs to dynamically be brought in. Yes.
Right. So it'll do basically two evaluates in that case. So basically evaluate that person's privilege set, take those results and those give them variables that'll then plug in as they're evaluating the calc for the test, and combine them together to come up with, did it pass the test or not, right? Did it fail the test? If it fails the test, the expense gets an error and it does not move on to bookkeeping to get paid, right? That kind of thing. So I do this kind of thing with evaluates all the time in the LETs. It can be very powerful, very powerful.
Certainly, certainly. Thank you, Heather. Okay. Jacob?
Yeah, another area that's, so I do a lot of work with FM better forms, and you have to construct a JSON object based on your table relationship. So if you set your JSON object based on a let function that's basically just capturing all the fields in your table, it's really useful in that case for setting just a calculation within the table.
Certainly, certainly.
Yeah.
The other nice thing about a let statement is you can be setting the same object over and over and over again and kind of incrementing the same object, particularly like with JSON. So you can be setting your same object, like JSON equals this, and you're adding something to your JSON, and then JSON equals, and you're basically appending your same JSON object with your next part of the let statement. And the value equals this, and you're basically adding to that same object, which when you're building that calc in your data viewer in the first place, allows you to incrementally be validating what you're building and the result that you're getting. And it also allows you you were commenting how you could put $1 in front of there and create a global variable. That can be very helpful too in debugging. If you've done that within your let statement, as you're debugging, it can give you a lot of clues as well by using the let statement that way.
Right. So for example, if you look at the let right here, you can change the result where you have the C, that bottom C there, you could change that to an A or a B, and you can, if you're in your data viewer, you can test it as you're going, just as, it makes it real easy if you go into data viewer and you can change that result to the different interim variables so that you can see what you're messing up.
Right, but you could also change something. So you could change that B to a $B so that you know what it was that was being evaluated, because maybe something, if C didn't come out right, you might want to look while you're debugging at what was the formula that was being evaluated. Maybe something inside that wasn't exactly what you were expecting. So you want to see what is it actually giving you, what is actually being evaluated. So maybe you put a $sign in front of that B so that you can see while you're debugging what
the return value.
While it's actually running, what is it seeing?
Yeah, a lot of times what I'll do in that case is after the B, I would do a return before the C, and then I would put $B equals B, and that way I don't mess up my calc, but I can, it forces it to go to the variable.
True. You can do that too. Yeah.
So all kinds of little tricks on it that make it really useful.
I just wanted to say that I didn't recognize this as a let because I've never seen Taylor do a let statement without a SQL call inside of it.
No, I do a lot of those. So, yep. Okay, Mike. Okay, any other comments on lets before we move into whiles? The wild world of whiles. Okay. While. Okay, so while is a fairly new function. It came to FileMaker in FileMaker 18, where lets came in FileMaker 7. So 18 is very new. It's still new enough that I have to make sure people on old versions of FileMaker aren't using it and it not working, because I run into that. Someone says, why is this not working? Well, you're in FileMaker 17 and you need to upgrade currently supported version of FileMaker. But anyway, and for those of you who don't know, FileMaker 18 is no longer officially supported. It was deprecated last June. So if you're not on FileMaker 19, you're unsupported. So anyway, at least from Claris perspective. So the official Claris help definition of while, as it says right here, is repeats logic while condition is true and then returns the result. Boy, that makes it very simple for what it is, but basically how I describe it to people is, as I say right here, while is a looping function. So this is the way to, within a single calculation, I guess I should have said calculation instead of function, but it's a single calculation that you can loop through and do that. So in the past, we used to be able to do that through recursive custom functions. So, and I always did not like the syntax of recursive custom functions. And for that reason, I really avoided custom functions forever. And anyway, but other people seem to be able to use them successfully. But I had a little brain fart with them, and I just did not like recursive custom functions. But now that custom functions can use whiles, I like them a whole lot better. So anyway, I don't use the old way to do it. But those of you who were good at recursive custom functions, good for you. I wasn't. But the benefits that you have here is that you have a single calculation or function that does the looping. And one thing that is kind of nice about it from the FileMaker perspective is it's actually faster to do a while than it is to do a scripting loop. So if you solved a lot of things with doing loops, if you actually want to improve your performance, going to a while performs FileMaker functions, and that's just kind of the nature of how FileMaker works. Not that it logically should be that way, but anyway, sometimes you just have to understand how FileMaker does things, and whiles are faster. So good way to improve some performance. Okay, so the logic, if you go to the FileMaker help and click on Insert FileMaker, what you get is that first line, which is while, then initial variables, conditions, logic, and result. And then the example they give down below is a little bit more help. So you have while, and then you do your parentheses open, and then you name your variables. And that's very important because the only variables that can be used later on are ones that are named. So if you don't name a variable, you're not going to be able to use it in your logic. So, so keep that in mind. You're going to have to, it's kind of like programming. You have to declare a variable before you can use it. Then your condition is, when am I going to exit this loop? A lot of times it will be, for example, I want to do this 10 times. So I tell it I'm going to exit after 10 times. But it can be other things like when the output is not empty, in other words, you get a result, or if the time is past a certain time, it can loop until a certain time of the day or something. There's all kinds of conditions you can do as a formula. And then you use your logic, which is kind of like the let part of it. It's where you can set all your expressions and calculate everything, and then you put them all back together in a result, because like all calculations, you get one result that comes out. So while you may do a whole bunch of calculations within it, only one result comes out. That's where the result is here. So that's the overview of it. And let's go take a look at more of the details of it. So this is the same thing here. And this is where on the left side, I've described the same thing that they had before in their help definition, but this is to provide a better visual of it. So you have a while here, and then we need to declare our variables. So even loops, if you're going to use any variable, you have to declare it in the initial variables. And so if I'm going to use loop and loops and output, I need to declare all of those up in the first part of the initial variables. Otherwise, I can't use them in the logic or the result or the condition. So you declare your variables, including one. See my output, I had to declare it as null. I made it, double quotes. That means output is nothing. So you can't just leave it blank and not declare it. Even if there is nothing in the value, you have to declare it as a nothing. So, so that's why output has a nothing there. And in this case here, we're going to continue this loop for a certain number of times. That's the condition. And so this condition is where a loop is less than loops. So we're going to start with loop at 0. And when it gets, it will continue long as that is true. And soon as loop is greater than loops, then we will exit this loop. So basically when loop becomes 11, we will then exit this loop. So then on the logic is what we do on each loop. So when you're doing a logical loop, every time you do a loop, you're going to go through the logic once. So if you're going to have 10 loops, you're going to go through the logic 10 times. So your logic in this case, and most of the times you're going to need to increment your logic somehow. I like to call it loop. The mathematicians out there will call it n. So you do, and loops will be I. So for your mathematicians, you would say n equals n plus 1, and you would go until, instead of loops, you'd go until I. But I like to spell things out with loop and loops. So I'm sure Jeremy would use n and I because he's a mathematician who probably chuckles at my loops.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Heather. Anyway, and then of course, ultimately after the condition fails, when it's doing those loops, when that condition fails, then whatever the last value of the result is what will come out. And of course, and we're calling the result in this case output. So then whenever that condition fails, whatever the value of output is what will come out as your final answer. So in case you were wondering what this does, this basically, every time we run through the loop, I'm doing a list of whatever was an output before. Let's do another line after it that just throws a random number. So if I were to do this, I would get 10 random numbers in an array of one after the other, one and then carry return, and another one. There would be 10 just random numbers is all that this while does. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute because sometimes if you haven't done a while before, that's a bit to swallow in. So any questions at this point about the parts of a while and kind of how it works before we get to our examples?
You said initially that the condition was when it was going to exit, but this condition is how long it's going to stay in.
Long as the, yeah, it's the opposite of that.
Okay.
Long, yeah.
Okay. Because
So
I was taking notes and. Okay.
Exactly. I said that wrong. You were correct.
Okay.
So, okay, important thing to realize because otherwise it does a loop once and then you're all over with.
Does while always return an output, even if your condition
Nope.
Closes? Initially?
If you go through your initial loops and then your condition fails and doesn't pass, to go on to the logic, what you get is your output is whatever you did in your declared values. And in this case here for output is a blank. If I put a B in there, if it fails on the first one, you'd get a B on the output. So it's, yes, if your first condition fails, it doesn't go on, continue, then all you'll get is what you declared in your initial variables.
Yeah, but it'll still provide an output.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It does. It doesn't give a question mark. I guess that would be one thing to inquire if it would give you a question mark, which is what FileMaker usually does when it errors out. It doesn't consider that an error. It just gives you whatever you've declared in the initial variables as your result output in that case. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, so we're ready to move into examples. Okay, so here's an example of, now I'm not going to explain what JSON is, but if you use JSON, it's a new feature to FileMaker since about FileMaker 16 of a way of keeping organizing arrays of information. And obviously loops are very effective in managing arrays, you know, because you're going to want to loop through an array to either do calculations or pull information out of the array or whatever. And so in this example here, the first variable I've declared is called array. And I'm going to just say that's just some JSON array. And maybe it's a variable called $JSON that I've set earlier in the script or something, but just think of that array as some JSON array that we get, and we're going to want to loop through this array. And I'm going to assume that this array has, among other things in it, a field called amount, and we're wanting to add up all the amounts. So this whole example here is we're going to loop through this JSON array and we're going to add up the amounts. So on the array, we've got to declare the array, and of course it needs to be some valid JSON, and you might, if you're doing this for real, you might want to be testing that it is valid JSON, otherwise you get wonky results. And then when you have an array, we're assuming it's a one-level array, so we're going to just list the keys of the array. And so that's what the keys are. And so the keys are, in essence, the record numbers of the array. And we're going to loop through, starting with loop equals 0. And then we're going to, how many loops we're going to do is however many keys they are. So this is, think of them as the primary keys of the JSON array. And we're going to do an output that starts at 0, and we're going to just go through each of those records in the array, and we're going to add the amount to it. So we're going to continue through this long as loop is less than loops. And when it's no longer less than loops, when it equals loops, it's then going to exit out and give us this output value. So we're going to go to our first record is going to be loop equals loop plus 1. So we're going to increment the 0 to a 1. And then we have our array of keys. And so I'm going to say the key for this first loop is get the value from the keys of the loop. If you know anything about JSON, the first value of a JSON is a 0, not a 1. So that's always wonky. So our first key would probably be a 0. And then I want to pull across that whole record or row of that first element of the array. And so we're going to say the record is JSON get element of the array, whatever that first key is. So we're just looking at one set of value in there. It's going to probably think of it as a row of fields in there. And then the value is we're going to pull out of that record. There's a field in there called amount. And so we're going to pull out the amount value. And we're going to say output equals output plus this value. So we're going to then go back and loop to the second record and do our test. And we're going to keep looping through every time. And we're going to pull out all of the values that are amount within that JSON array. We're going to add them up. And then we exit out here. We will have the total value of amount in that JSON. So hopefully most of you know a little bit about JSON, but I guess I'll pause a minute to see if there are some questions about this. So do you get the concept of what I'm doing?
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to kind of add, if you increment your loop at the end in the example of JSON, the first value will be declared as 0. So if you're using the array, it's 0 indexed. So you'll always grab the first value and then increment up from that, right? If loop's declared at the bottom.
Right. So one thing you can do is when you're doing incrementing, I mean, you can do it at any point in here, but usually when you're doing your incrementing, you either do it at the beginning or at the end, and each of them has an advantage. When you're using JSON, kind of as Jacob was pointing out, your first loop would already be set at 0. And so that would help in grabbing, if you're going to use, instead of grabbing a key, you know, a lot of times you're just grabbing, you can use loop instead of key to grab the next JSON element. So there's some advantages to setting the increment at the beginning versus the end of your logic. So yes, you are right, Jacob. There can be some benefits of that.
Yeah, FileMaker is kind of weird in the fact that it's not zero indexed, but I mean, because a record's got to exist. So you're either searching on nothing, like if this example wasn't, JSON, this would be perfect for FileMaker's normal functionality.
Well, if you had like a column, excuse me, a carry return delimited array.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we're in this case here, though, one reason why I didn't do it is because I'm not grabbing things based on the zero value, because I'm grabbing the key instead of using the loop.
Yeah, from your, yeah.
But
that makes sense.
But yeah, clearly to be aware that zero things that start with zeros like JSON on the first record, the first 10 records are records 0 through 9. So that always took me a long time. There were more errors in FileMaker 16 when I said, give me record 1, and record 1 was really record 2. So, but anyway, once you do it enough times, you get used to that and it makes sense. But I've made a lot of mistakes along that way. Why am I missing one value on this? And I'm always missing the zero value. Oops. So anyway, but this is an example of if you have to use JSON arrays where, the while function can be very useful to loop through and do something like this case, add up a particular field within a JSON. So if someone gave you a JSON array and said, add these up, and you're like, how do I add them up? Well, you use a while. It loops through and we'll add those up for you. Okay, so guess what? You can combine lets and whiles. Woohoo! Mike Strange, you getting excited yet? So this is a custom function I did last year that someone needed something where they wanted to convert the URL to a web-safe hex encoded URL, but you only do it on the part past the question mark, not on the domain part. So anyway, you can forget the purpose of it, but this is just an example. But basically, we wanted to do the input here row and then have this type of an output that's web safe. So to do that, this is the example that I did here. And so as you can see, we have a let, and that's the outside of things. And then within it, the F2 function 2 there has a let within it. It's actually an if within a let within an if within the let. So, and you can do things the opposite way. You can have a while that has a let within the while. So just be aware that you can be confused either way. But all of these things very much combine together here. So in this case here, we have, F1 is where we're getting the position of the question mark. And then from that, we're manipulating the right side of it. And then we're going to go through all of the characters in the question mark of it, and we're going to hex encode them. So this literally looks at every character past the question mark. Remember, we're looking over here. So everything that comes out here to the question mark, the while is going to go through each character individually and is going to convert it to the hex code. So here's where we're doing the loop through each of those characters, and we're going to get the output so that in this case here, instead of equals, instead of like this curly bracket open, it's %7b, and instead of a double quote, you get %22. And so we were trying to convert all those to make them web safe for passing them. And so that's what this while does. It goes through all of those characters, and then we're going to go back and add the first part of the domain, everything to the left of the question mark, then the question mark, and then everything to the right of it that's now hex encoded so that it'll work for you. So anyway, that's the example of looping through where you have a while that loops. This while is within a let, which is within another let. So you can do whiles and lets within each other to keep things fun and challenging. Mm-hmm. So any of you guys try to do those? I imagine some of you've done a few of them. The challenge, of course, always is finding your mistakes when you're working with them, within them and debugging, because all it takes is one mistake and your output gets wazooed, and debugging can be a little bit challenging, but fortunately, let's help you do that a little bit better. But questions on this unusual little custom function I have here? But you could have used a recursive custom function in there too, but yuck. Heather knows how to do those, not me.
Looks fun.
Yep. Okay, and just to show that we can get even a little bit more complicated, someone wanted a custom function that uses while to take does a least squares linear regression on a basically you have a graph and you have a bunch of dots that are charted out there, and so the dots all have an X and a Y component. So we have a list value here of all the X and Y components. So the X went over 2 and we went up 0. And then next one we did X went over 2 and then it went up 1 on the Y. And then we went 6 over on the X and we went up on a 2. And we in essence have built a chart that has these dots on it. And so one of the questions that some people says, okay, we've got these dots. I want to figure out what the best straight line that fits through here is. And so there's a formula for this, which is called the least squares linear regression. And so the main thing is so that you could put these dots in there, and then once you have a least squares formula result, then you can use it to predict things from this pattern of lines out into maybe some future time or date. So assuming things are linear, which I know a lot of things aren't, but if you want to assume things are following a straight line, this is a great way to predict things down the road. So as you can see here, we have a let, and we start out with a while that's going through, and it's we're declaring all of our values here, and we're going to go through, and this formula basically has us add up a number of things, the rows square, the rows times each other, and I'm not a mathematician. Jeremy would be here explaining it all for us, but I just know the formula, and I know if you add all of these up here, that it then gives you a formula you can apply in here. Basically, when I got to the bottom here, I ran out of room. So you go across the bottom, go up to the top, and the let continues. And then this is where you add everything together. And then we have to make a formula. So to make a formula out of the result, we have to use a text string to say this is y equals mx plus b. Maybe you heard that back in your algebra days in school. Y equals the slope times x plus the y-intercept. So so this results in giving you a line formula, and it spells that line formula out, y equals something times x plus some number. And then it also gives you your slope and your intercept, and it returns it as JSON, because everything's in JSON now, right? Anyway.
In this example, is array the data that you're pulling this from?
The array is the data, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that's why we're put array right here is a list that would be 2, 0 on the first line, and then 2, 1 on the next line.
Right, because I don't see array declared anywhere. That's why I was asking. So array is the data that you're looking at, that you're
right.
That you're evaluating.
Because this was a custom function, array was defined up above where you set the variables.
Oh, got it. Got it. Okay.
So maybe this would be $array if we were in a script and we had pulled it from a variable from before, but yes, that's how array is. And of course the array could have been JSON or something else, but anyway, the way the customer was giving it to me was X, Y. So that's why I did it this way here. But anyway, kind of an interesting thing. So anyway, for mathematicians out there, I'm sure you think this is exciting. But what was nice was I could then return a result, a line formula to my customer just with one while here, and then we could use that formula later on to make predictions to say, based on these dots here, if I went out and said, oh, this is what 2 through 10, well, what if I put a 20 in? What would 20 probably be, or 30 or something? Well, it will estimate that line further on out.
Very cool.
Everybody remember high school math? So anyway.
No, I cheated my way through geometry, so no.
All those proofs and theorems. Woo.
You know, it's not my fault. It was summer school. The teacher would come in, say everybody's here, he'd take roll, and then he would leave the answers on the desk and leave the room. I mean,
What a wimp.
What were we to do?
As if he didn't know what would happen.
I know.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's an example using lets and whiles. And I'm going to go over to our data viewer and show some others here. We are running out of time because I'm trying to keep this within an hour. So let me get my data viewer up here. Let me say, I have to see if this works here. So data viewer. I share the data viewer window. References, custom functions. Might have to share the whole window. Might get kind of small for some of you. Share screen. Okay, do you guys see custom functions there?
Yes.
Okay, let's see if this is the one we did before. You see that custom function still? So do you see the actual formula? I don't know if it pops up. I don't think it did. Okay, so fail on that. Let me share the whole screen. Share screen. Okay, so hopefully you guys can now see a formula. Does that zoom in at all?
Not yet.
No. Yeah. Might not work.
It looks pretty, but can't read it.
Okay, let's see. Let me go to, let me put it in BB Edit because we can make things bigger there. Text. Can we make it bigger? Are you able to read those lines yet, or is that too small? So it's probably too small.
No, it hasn't changed yet.
Text display. Yeah, let's put it over. I know I can do it over in text editor. We'll do it that way. New. Okay. Just getting a little more readable, maybe.
A little better.
Try it a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, better?
Much better.
Okay. So this is an example. And this is basically where you're able to use a Google array. Use an array, and this is an example right here where we were making things up before, and we used this array that becomes an array like this, and these are made up. FYI, those, in case anybody think that's really where Steve lives or something, those are made up numbers. So no. but this is the array, and this is where we are using an array to use the while to go through and basically build an array in the format for Google Maps. So if any of you have ever done Google Maps, you can make an HTML and you can populate a JSON array, and it's a kind of JSON array. It's not an official JSON array in that such things like double quotes have to become single quotes in Google's version of the API. So that means you can create your array in JSON, then you have to manipulate it into the Google Maps way of doing it. And basically this goes through, and then any of you out there that are HTML people, we then build the HTML right here. So you have kind of your header, body, and then of course you got footer. And then everything in between is going to be the body part. And the body will have your array that you're going to put in here. So, so that will all get put in together down here where we have the header, we have the footer, and we have the array. The header and footer are basically copied out of the Google Maps API. What script, you know, in other words, this JavaScript that it has to run here and call, that's all just put, you just copy and paste out of the Google Maps API. So there's your footer, and then there's the header right here that's just copied out of the Google Maps API. And then the top part here is where we build the array that we're going to put in using all the whiles here. Here's array new, and this is under certain cases you're going to use this formula. Under certain cases you're going to use this formula, and then ultimately it will give you a result of a JSON array that you put together on it. And so while I'm not expecting anybody to really understand in this quick thing here, but basically what this did is in one let and while we built HTML that uses an array of FileMaker data to build charts, excuse me, a map in Google Maps, so that when you go to Google Maps, you can actually see a map of all of the dots charted that you have in your FileMaker geocoded fields where you have Latin long. So this assumes that somewhere in FileMaker you had addresses that have been geocoded, and it builds it all for you. So obviously nobody's going to memorize what we've done right here. And if you're interested in that, it is on my web page as an example that you can copy under the examples. But what's neat about it is, let's go to, let's see, are we up and running? Apparently we are. So we can show you the, no, it's not working right now, but there are a bunch of templates that we have up there. I happen to be working on my WebDirect stuff right now, so my WebDirect is down. But if you want to see the template sometime when it's up and running, it's at tms.us/fm, like FileMaker, all caps. And those will be the examples there. Anyway, I know this was a whirlwind tour, but we're out of time, so I had to wrap us down quickly. But any last minute comments on lets and whiles?
I have one question about the code you were just showing us, where you have details for the header and the footer. Was there anything in that was unique to that particular while statement, or was that code that could have been in a custom function that you're calling?
If you go to my example, the template has it as a custom function. So you can use it as an array and it spits out the map.
Okay.
As HTML, so which is then ready to be plugged into a web viewer.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that wasn't, so when you're doing it, you wouldn't have to include all that code every time.
No.
Right. Okay.
So it's a custom function that you do that once, you feed it the array, and then I just go to my web viewer and say, put this, calculation of the custom function in, and that way you're not reinventing the wheel. So,
Well, I just want to say about the while, I was a slow adopter to the recursive custom functions, and I would have a calc where I understood the core of what I wanted. I'd write the core test, that I needed to perform, and then I would hand it off to Jeremy. And he would turn it into a recursive custom function, because I couldn't quite grasp where the test was for cutting it off, because some people would write it so that the test would be at the beginning, and others would write it so that the test was at the end. And that confused me. The while doesn't do it that way. The while is very specific. This is where your test is for when it's going to stop or when it's going to continue. And so that is actually a little bit easier. But I have felt a little bit the same way, a little skittish about it, because it kind of is the same sort of thing. It's working similarly, but it's structured better.
yes,
in my opinion.
Structured is much better than the syntax. So
yeah, and I just implemented something where we converted something from doing a loop, sort of a loop within a calc, and to a while, and I'm very, very pleased with how it's turned out. But I kind of did the same thing this time. I took my core for a test and I went to Jeremy and I said, here's how I want it to work.
Go, Jeremy, go.
And I needed to perform this test against any number of those things, those records that might exist. And then he turned it into the while, and then I tested it and it worked. But I was still a little skittish, but I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. And I have written a few of my own that have worked. So I'm real pleased with it. And I think that eventually I will remember the rules.
Well, I certainly am much more into it now that we can do it in a calculation everywhere instead of just custom functions, and the syntax is better. So hooray to FileMaker. That was a real plus for them to get that out, I think. So. Okay, I think we're going to wind things up here. We will have a meeting next month, and it might be Greg Price presenting, but I'm not sure. We'll have to confirm on that. So, but anyway, I hope you guys thaw out and, you don't have any pipes busted or anything, and you're making it through the day and staying warm. So at least those of you in the Dallas area. And we're glad to have everybody here. And we look forward to seeing all of you guys hopefully next month. So I'm going to end the recording here.
Good.